Hey team, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to be using Python, going to use TKinter, and I'm going to make a GUI application to perform the CRUD operations on a JSON object. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to be using Visual Studio's 2022. Notice here I'm creating a new project, Python application, Python all platforms desktop. Let's do this. Let's call this project name Python TKinter JSON, and then press the Create button. This application requires the package TK. Notice that we say pip install TK. It will download and install it on your local computer. Before we dive into the source code, let's look at the program, look at the features, and see if this is something you want to learn. Notice here I have a Python TKinter application that integrates with a JSON file. And here is that JSON file. Notice that we begin with a first name of first, and it goes down to first name of fifth. You can see when I loaded that, my first one is first, my fifth line is fifth. Now we can select individual lines, and then these values go into the respective first name, last name, and cell phone, just like you see the headers in the Treview Control. So that's first, that's second, and that's fifth. And of course you can skip all around and look at data. Now the next thing we'll look at is printing. So when I click on the print button, notice the output goes to this list. Notice we have first down to fifth. Now I can select a single line and then say, we'll just add a Y to it, and we'll say update. And then notice when I go print that, notice first is now firsty. It's also firsty inside of our Treview Control. Now I can add a new record there, and we can just say new record, a very good friend of mine, 444, 44, 444, 44, and then say add. Then notice we have a new record. I can click firsty, I can click new, and then I can say delete this record. Let's show that first. Notice we have new in here, and then let's delete that. And let's do a print again, and notice now new is gone. So I keep writing this file and reading it and displaying it to the Treview Control, so I'm managing this list through the JSON object. So I've shown you add, I've shown you update, I've shown you delete. Cancel kind of gets you back to the start state. Print prints out this thing. Let us start reviewing the source code. Notice that we have 4 import statements. So get those typed in. And then we have 2 global statements. My data is where we are going to be storing all the JSON data in current row. I think that just makes sense what that is. Now we're going to set my data list initially to an empty list. Now is when we get into TKinter. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say root equals TK. And then we're going to say root title, root geometry, and root configure. And that's just going to set up our visualization. Let's take a look at that. Notice we have a title bar, list of friends, list of friends. Then we have the geometry 1278 by 720. That's actually the size of this window. And then the background is light blue. Now, when we look at the first control label frame, notice its parent is root. Its text will be info. Its background will be light gray, and its font, Gonzalez, and it'll be 14 points. Then notice we assign this frame to a grid layout. That grid will be row 0, column 0, a row span of 5, and a column span of 4. Let's see what that looks like. So here is our label frame, this light gray little box up here. Now notice it is sitting at row 0, column 0. Now the info is the text. The background color is light gray, and the font size for this is a Gonzalez 14. very easy to see. Now what we're going to do is, using that as a parent, we're going to be putting in some labels now. Now it's important to understand that the first label frame has a parent of root. Now label frame itself has become a parent, and what we're going to do is our next 4 labels is going to use that frame as its parent. Then notice what we say is we say anchor W. W is short for west, or if you can't think of that, it's the left. And then the width will be 24, height 1, and then kind of like you'll see a little indentation, it's called a ridge. And then I'll have text for ID, first name, last name, and cell phone. And then just notice that on our grid layout, we're going to be using, inside of that label frame, we're going to be using rows 1, 2, 3, and 4, all at position 0. Let us see what that looks like. And there you have ID, first name, last name, and cell phone. You see that right down in this last column, in the column called text. You also see that all of the values inside of these labels are left aligned. They call that anchor W. Another thing that you should read about is this relief. Notice that it's kind of like a little ridge, you know, it's like kind of like cut out, fits in there real nice, like a drop down. And then you understand what a font is. So this is a Gonzalez 14-point font inside of there. So now you know another control. So you know the label frame and you know the label, and you kind of like understand parents now. Now, if you look closely on the right side of this bar, you'll see a label here. That label is going to be holding a UUID. Some people call it a GUID, unique identifier. That's what that is. And then notice we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 data entry text boxes. In TK, they call those controls entry. Let's learn more about those. At the very top, we say ID underscore value equals string var. And then I'm going to say ID value. I want you to set its value to this UUID4. It's a unique identifier builder. Notice on line 3, we said import UUID. Notice it says UUID objects, universally unique identifiers. So always giving us a unique value. If you look at our tree view, you'll notice that each of the IDs values are unique, totally random, and you can just look at them and tell that they are unique. So I think you understand what the UUID4 produces now. Now remember, I said the first field is of type label. Notice this is a label. And the way I get the value in there, you're going to have to think about this for a moment. Notice I say label, input frame. Frame is our label frame, right? This guy. Notice that is this name. Its parent is root. Now, when we come down here and look at this first label, its parent is this frame, anchor left. Notice on the other boxes, the labels, I say text equals cell phone. Now I'm saying text variable equals a value. And that value equals ID value. Notice I started it off with string var, and then I used the UUID4 function to get a value and put it into ID value. Then we assign that through this variable. And then notice everything else is the same as our labels above. Then we get down to our 3 entry controls. Notice isParent is also input frame. They all have the width of 30. They all have the border width of 2. They all have the foreground color of black. And the font is all the same. Then notice each of them underneath that, I say the name of the control.grid. And they all begin at 1, 2, 3, and 4. All at column 1, and all have a column span of 2. except the label control. And there you have this entire top box is now done. Now you will notice on line 64, our next control is the Treeview Control. That means we're skipping the buttons. The buttons, we have to do that underneath here because these have a special little button command on it that I'll have to talk about when I get there. But right now, we're going to be talking about this control. Now this is called a Treeview Control, and this is what we're going to be loading in our JSON file. Now when you first read this TTK Treeview, what does root mean? That's right. Who's its parent? Its parent goes all the way back to root. And then we're going to say this Treeview has 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it has another property called show, and we have headings in there, and then a height of 16. We are then going to say TRV, that is the name of our Treeview. Grid 11, 0, row span 16, column span 4. That puts the Treeview where it needs to be. We are then going to use the heading method. Notice TRV, the name of our Treeview, heading. Now we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, just like we had 4 columns. The first one is going to be ID, first name, last name, cell phone. Notice I'm going to anchor them in the center. Let's see that. Notice ID, first name, last name, cell phone. They are in the center of each field. And then we're going to say TRV column, number 1. You can use the pound or just use a number here. And then you can say anchor W. W is for west. That's the left. And then I'm going to say the width of column 1 is 270 pixels. And then you can see that we have 3 widths of 140. Now the stretch, that means like this will be resizing. If I make the size of my form bigger, you know, this thing will grow. So the first column will constantly grow. And there's your headings, there's your column definitions. I'm hoping that you understand that for our Treeview Control. Let's just look at that one more time. You can see here our columns. Our columns, we have a cell phone, last name, first name, and an ID. They are centered within that 140, 140, 140, and 270. Now this right here is the data. What we just defined is this top row and then the column itself. And there is the Treeview Control. Now for the code behind, the code that actually is going to make this application work, I'm just going to go through here and kind of show it to you, have you type it in, and then we're going to run through this and actually see how it works. So what you need to do is concentrate on this first one is just see the flow. I'm going to stop at the end and let you type all this in, but you don't have to do that right now. I just want you to understand what I'm doing here, okay? So let's talk about it. So what happens is I have this thing called load JSON from file. It's a JSON file and it's sitting out on my computer somewhere. And where is that somewhere? Well, c:temp, the name of that file is called amigos. Now using the open command, I'm going to open that up for read. And I get a file handle when I open up a file. Now once I get that file handle, I'm then going to use that file handle and I'm going to load that JSON into my object called my data list. Now when I'm done reading that file and populating my data list, this file handler will close. So now, I don't leave, my files dangling, so whenever you open something, you got to close it. That's just the way good programming is. Now, once we get done with this method, how do we even execute this? Well, this is a function. Remember, Python executes sequentially, so it starts at the top and runs down, but when it hits this is just a function. It doesn't get executed. But if we go all the way down to the bottom, notice on line 305, I actually call load JSON from file. So as you see, I'm going sequentially. All of a sudden I hit this line at the very bottom of the program, and this is what makes that JSON file get loaded. The next method, save JSON file, save JSON to file. Well, that's just the opposite of this one. Now this one right here means I have been using it. I've been maybe doing insert, updates, and deletes from my data list. Now I want to preserve those changes to amigos.json. Notice I'm going to open up this file for write mode. File handler tells me the stats about that, like its file handle, is it open, is it closed, what's its name, and such. Very, very important file pointer. Then what I'm going to do is a JSON.dump. Notice my data list, file handle, and because I say indent equals 4, that means when you produce this JSON output file, be pretty about it. Don't give me some ugly looking JSON. And then guess what I do? I close that file handle, and then the next method, save JSON to file, is all done. Now our next method is called remove all data from TRV. TRV is my Treeview. So what I do is I say get children. Now for each child, I'm going to put an item. I'm going to stay over this, and then I'm going to delete each item. So this removes all the rows that are in the Treeview control. Now, once I have that data, my data list in memory, I'm going to try to load that Treeview control with JSON. The first thing I have to do is I have to make sure there's no data in there, because each row must have a unique row ID. See on line 120 here, I say ID equals row indexed. If I go and do this again and I have 5 records, you can imagine the first record is row index 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I come in here and execute this again and I don't clear out that Treeview control, then it would try to insert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. That would violate the, hey, this has to be a unique value. So I remove all that text, and there it is right there. I just go get all those children, and I delete each item. So from that list, now remember I loaded that list from a JSON file. It was, the inside is a key value, it's a dictionary. So I'm going to assign the key ID to GUID value, the key first name to first name, last name, phone number. And then look what I did. I said Treeview, insert, make the index the very last index, and then IIID equals row index. Notice I initialize that to 1, and then I increment it. And I'm going to stay inside of this loop until I am done with the number of rows that are in my data list. Now look here, when I try to put that value in there, values, GUID, first name, last name, and cell phone. That's in values. Notice text, I'm putting the empty string. Now don't worry that you can't see this. I'm going to show you all the source code in just a moment, okay? Just stay with me and let's make sure we understand this. So load Treeview with JSON, I think you understand that. The JSON has been created. I now loop over it and insert it. That's it. Now clear all fields. So on my form, you remember when that was running, I had first name, last name, and cell phone on the form. Now to remove the data in there, you have to say delete. I want you to start at position 0 and go to the end and clear all that data out. So that's what 126 to 128 does. And then we have to set its values. So you can remember the ID is not an entry control, it is a label control. So I have to say text is empty string. Then I'm going to set the CRM first name to focus, and the ID value, I'm going to call that function uuid4 and put a value in there. And then I'm going to change the background to FF, a bunch of Fs. That's kind of white, not kind of, it is white. This is white, and notice it starts with the pound. Now if you don't put the pound in there, you'll get an error, and I'll ask you what is FF. Now our next method, find row in my data list. So I'm going to send in a GUID value. Now remember, the GUID value is unique. I can only ever find one row because of this value. Notice the ID, see this value? That is unique. Each of these values that I can create will always be unique. But first I say row is 0, found is false. Then for rec in that data, remember this is a list of dictionaries. If that key ID equals that GUID value, then found is true. Notice I initialize it as false. Then I'm going to break. Now, if it's not that value, I'm going to increment row. I'm going to come get the next one. I'm going to say, hey, are you what I'm looking for? I'm going to stay inside this list until I find one. Now, if I don't find one, found is false. So it's just going to come through there and return -1. But if I do find it, I know what the row number is, and I'm going to say return row. And that's find row in my data list. Okay, let's now type in the source code. You remember load JSON from file. That just loads that file and then puts it into this object called my data list. Now the next method, what it did is it took from memory my data list and going to write it out to that file. That's all that does. On both of these, you understand how important that file handler is. It gives us all the details about when I open a file. Now our next method we need to talk about is remove all data from that TRV. Remember, I use this method so I can clear it out so I can rewrite to it. This whole goal of this video is being able to reuse that JSON file. So I read it, I write it, I constantly are saving that file. Okay, so remove all data from the Treeview TRV. Now the next method was load TRV with JSON. Now I made you understand why I have to keep removing it. Every time this method is called, I kind of have to reset that row index value. The row index is supposed to be unique. Now I know we look like we're putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but pretty much this is just uniqueness. It has nothing to do with, its ordinal position. So I know it looks like I'm using sequential numbers, but when I start doing the add, you would see like a different pattern being presented. So when I first started learning this control, I always was looking for a selected index where it would tell me the row number. Well, it just doesn't work like that. So row index has nothing to do with the ordinality. It just has to do with keeping that row unique. That's all that's about. Load TRV with JSON. Now our next method was clear all fields. I explained to you that inside of the inside of the entry controls, we have to clear them a special way. They need the word delete, and it starts at 0 and it ends with the end. That's a key value that gets the length of the max string that will go in there. Notice I do that for first name, last name, and cell phone. Remember, CRM ID is a label, so we have to say configure text equals empty string. And then I set the focus to that CRM first name. And then we use the method on that object, uuid. They have a method called uuid4. And then I'm saying inside of the ID value, remember that variable? Set that value to this. Now change the background color to white. Now in our next method, find row in my data list, I explained to you that GUID is about uniqueness, and this will just loop over that data list. So this is a list of dictionaries. When we say rec.id, this is a key, and we're saying, hey, at this key, if that value equals what I'm sending in, then you found it. If you never find it, I'm going to return -1. If you do find it, I'm going to return row. This is standard looping over a list. And our last method that we talked about was change background color. I'm going to send in either like a word like blue, white, black, red, or I can send in any RGB hex color. Has to start with the pound. Change background color. Now remember, you just try to concentrate on what I'm telling you. I'm going to come back and show you all the source code. Just listen and understand. Now, our first method, change enable state. So what happens is we have buttons on there, and there's certain states that I want it to be enabled or disabled. An example, when I select a row here, I would expect the add button to be disabled because this already exists. This is my primary key. So the only thing I can do here is either do the update command or the delete. Now I can also do cancel. That should clear this out and make my add button available and these two disabled. Let's see what happens. So notice update is now disabled, delete is disabled, but add is now available. Now add, I don't have any values in there. So I have to kind of maybe show the users, you kind of messed up here. What do you have to do? So notice when you click the add button, I make the data entries backgrounds red, and notice that I set focus to first name. I hope you understand what that section was all about now. So there you have change enable state. It's just the button name, and then state equals normal or disabled. Now our next function, load edit fields with row data. Notice I'm sending in a tuple. Now tuple is just the values separated by a comma. So notice I selected on line 1. And now that I'm inside of line 1, let's look what that tuple looks like. Notice is this values separated by commas. Now notice I'm going to do clearing out. You've already learned that 0 to n means, like make it empty. And then at the bottom, I'm actually going to be doing inserts. Notice I do an insert here for 3, an insert at 2, and an insert at sub-0. And because ID value is an object, remember it's a label, but I have to set it appropriately. So this value, this variable, I'm going to set its value to tuple sub-0, which gets that GUID value. And notice that row went up here from the ID all the way down to phone number. Now, if I hit the cancel button, then I'm going to clear all fields and I'm going to change the enable state to new. The enable state, we just looked at that. So notice it's not this one, not this one. Oh, it's else. So the update and the delete will be disabled and only the add button will be normal. Let's see what happens when I press the cancel button. Here we go. Let's press the cancel button. So cancel took out our values, changed the background color, disabled update and delete, and the add button is now active. Our next function, print all entries. Well, that's kind of easy to think about what that's going to do is, notice here I have my object and I'm going to go get one at a time and then I'm going to print that rec. When I'm done printing, I'm going to set focus to the CRM first name. Let's see how that works. Let's click on the print button and there is the values. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is how many items that we see in our Treeview Control. You can also see that the CRM first name is active. Now let's look at the add button. The add button gets the values from the form. I get the ID value. That's now a variable, so I have to use get and set to get stuff in and out of that. Then CRM, FN, get, last name, get, and cell phone, get. Notice I put them into local variables. Now I do a test and I say, if the length of first name is 0, make that a light red, pinkish looking color. Else, process that request. I'm going to call this method with insert and then those 4 variables. Let's first see how it bails out on this color change because there is no first name. And then we'll go look at process request. As you can see, there is no value in first name, last name, and cell phone. But the add button is enabled. Now when I click on that, it's going to assign those values, whatever they are. Notice right now they're empty to our local variables. But first name length will be 0. Let's see that. Notice it's now going to change the background to this color. And let's take a little look-see. Notice that they are red. Now, if they have good values, like we have now 6s down the row, now we're going to put that next row here. So it's going to bypass this length because first name is not 0. So it's going to get us to line 221. Let's do that. Ready? Step down there. Notice I get all the values, first name, last name, and cell phone. Skip that, and now we're going to say process request. Notice I'm sending in insert. So now it comes in there right away, and I say if command type equals update, if it equals insert or it equals delete, do them appropriately. So which one does it do? So you come up here to our input parameters and notice command type equals insert. Now, because it's insert, what I do is I build a dictionary entry. And let's see if I can get this down to 2 lines. So when it's insert, notice I build a dictionary. Let's F10 that. So I'm going to skip over the first one. And now, look at that, I'm going to build dictionary. Now dictionary has that value. And then what happened is the list was appended. Now if we look at this again, now we should have 6. And notice we have 6, 6, and 6 as our values. Now that we have our my data list updated, there's new values in it, we have to save that JSON out to disk. Does that make sense? has to be saved out to disk. And then I'm going to reload that with that JSON. And then I'm going to clear out all those fields. Let's do that. Let us now go to Save JSON File, F11, and I'm going to do this method. We've already talked about it, but this is the first time we've seen it execute. It's going to change because I have a new entry in there. I have that first name 6, last name 6, and phone is 6. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to, file has been written and closed. Now I'm going to say load that Treeview Control with JSON. Now the first thing we know, we have to remove entries from that. Look here, it's totally populated. I can't be adding new entries to this and, like I already have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I try to push this in again, it's going to come up and say, you have duplicate members, trees invalid, or some kind of error message like that. So let's step into remove all, F11. Now it's going to get children. I'm just going to stay over there and I'm going to delete each of these lines. Notice I'm on line 2, right? And now I'm back in there and I say, okay, now let's do this again. Let's start with 1 and let's keep incrementing that. And now remember, I'm getting all the data from the my data list. Okay, this is going to take a while because, okay, excellent. And we have our 6. We cleared this out and notice that I have my bar available. So when I pick 6, so we looked at add and now we'll look at edit. So I can select any row I'd like. Let's do this 6 and then let's say 60 and last name is 60. And then notice here I will hit the update statement. Now the update statement does just like we say. It will write that file out to disk. Notice the content of our JSON file, it used to be 6, now it's 60. So every time we do an insert, update, or delete, we write that file out, we read it back in, and we put it back in the Treeview Control. And now it's time to do the delete command. So I'm going to select an item. Notice delete is available, so I can say delete, and guess what? It's gone. Now what happens is I will then remove it from the list. I will then save out the JSON file, and then I will reread it in, and it will be everything except that one entry I deleted. Now look here, I tried to reload amigos.json and saying, hey, some other program changed the file. Do you want to see what they did? I'm going to say, yeah, let's see. And then notice the 6th is gone. So do you see how the JSON file is tightly integrated with our front end? Now at any point of the program, I can always see what is in my list. All I have to do is hit the print and notice that will show me its values. Let me put that here and hit the print again. And you can see that it does keep printing them out. Let's now make sure you get all the source code for that last little lesson. Our first method was change enable state. Go ahead and get all that typed in. I'm going to say yes here. It's been reviewed. And then our next method, load edit field with row data. You saw that it was a tuple. Remember, just a comma separated value. You now understand how delete works for a entry control. You understand that this is a value variable. Let's put a yes on this control as well. You saw how the cancel worked and how I cleared all the fields and I changed the colors and I enabled the state new. You saw that work. Let's hit yes. And then on line 200, let's put a couple more spaces here. Print all entries is the print button. You saw me loop over it and print everything out to the output window. And you saw me set focus to the CRM first name field. That finishes print all entries. Now our next method was to add an entry. You saw that how I got the values from the entry controls. And this is the label control for the GUID. We saw if I didn't give a first name, the color went to that light red. And you saw me call process request with those values. You saw that work. On the next one, on update entry, we did the update command. You saw me update the value. Let's understand what delete entry does. The first thing we must do is select an item. I'll select this one that says X. And then it will be populated. Now once it's populated, notice the delete button is now activated. So all I have to do is say delete, and I find its index inside of my data list, and X is gone. So the delete pretty much just has to keep going through our list, find out what that GUID is, and then delete it appropriately. So if I delete this next one, 8B, so I select it, it loads 8B, EB, right? And then I say delete, and then it's gone. So I'll do one more. So I select 588, I execute that, and then 588, a bunch of D's, and then I hit the delete button, and it is gone. So I think you get it. So the delete has now been, I've shown you how that works. So let's say yes there. Now, delete calls process requests, and I send in delete, and notice I only send in a GUID. So the GUID is the only thing that really matters to me. This is the primary key. Primary keys to me say, this is what makes the row unique. Okay, cool. Now, process requests, you know that there are 3 commands. There's the update command, there's the insert command, and there's the delete command. So you can see here in the update, I'm actually going to do the update. Notice I do a dictionary, and for that one row, you know, sub some row number, I'm going to put that value in there. I'm going to do an update. Now for the insert command, I have to do an append. And then for the delete, I'm going to use the delete for that row that I found. Then I'm going to save that file out. I'm going to reload the tree, and then I'm going to clear all the fields. So this command, while it's long, it's actually quite simple to understand. It does the CRUD command for us, the update, the insert, and the delete. I'm going to say I reviewed that with you. Let's look at the source code. Ready? I'll give you the first down to 267, and then finish that up, 271. Okay, so our next method, I have to teach you 284 first. So notice here is our Treeview Control variable. And what you can do is you can set up bindings. So I'm going to bind that on button release. That means like mouse up. And when I select on the Treeview Control and I do my mouse up, it's going to call this method mouse button up callback. Notice this is it right here. And notice that it's going to get the current row index, and I'm going to convert that to a tuple. And then I'm going to try to load that, our fields up top, with that data for that last tuple. And then I'm going to change the button state management to edit mode. Now, why is this returning me the exact row index values? Well, I'm glad you asked. Now, what we have done is every time we do an insert, update, or delete, I'm making changes to a JSON file. I'm saving it to disk, and you know when I load it back in there, I have the values. And when I load it in the Treeview controls, I populate the row ID. And that is how we're getting this always to give us the current row index correctly. Now, if I didn't have that JSON file, determining what the row index is very complicated in this Treeview control. In fact, it's almost to the point of being unfriendly. But having that JSON file just makes everything simple. And I'm being very honest with that. So if you try to not use that, just insert an update from the Treeview control, you will find that there are some difficulties. But introducing a JSON file or other kind of memory management, it makes it easy. And there you have all of our code. I'm hoping that you understand this mouse button up. So you just bind. Now you can go to the internet and say Treeview Control bind, and then you will see that there are a bunch of different events that you can bind to. And then you can have, many of these. Now what happens is, like if you start putting buttons down there that perform almost the same action, you will have to handle what I like to call delegate. I'm not sure if I have a word. It's when everything fires. You have to handle them all appropriately. So it's kind of very difficult. But there you have it. So I've done that for you. Now, you'll notice that when we ran our program, I talked about this area. I talked about the tree view, but I never actually talked about putting buttons on the form. And that's why we're here. And we're here because of this. See this word command? So command is actually the method that I'm trying to call. And if I were to put these on top of all my methods here, it would come up and say that this function is undefined. So that's why I had to put these at the bottom and just handle it appropriately. So notice that we start off with another frame. We learned how to do frames at the very beginning of this. It's a label frame. Its parent is the root. And notice I'm not giving it no value for the frame, but it is going to be light gray in the same font. Then my first button I'm going to put on there. Now it will be its parent, and I'm going to say print. And when someone clicks on that button, I'm going to call that function print all entries. And you've seen that work many times already. As you can see, print all entries, that was a nice little function that we have written. Now our next method, we're going to have the same. In fact, let me just do all of these right now. The button frame will be the parent for all of these buttons. And then for each button, I'm going to pack it to the left. And that is why I was able to make one row that had all these. Now, if I don't say this pack side left, this buttons will want to go right down the middle. So I didn't like that. I decided to do this way. So button frame is our parent. And then we have the print button, the add, update, delete, cancel, and exit. Now on each of the buttons, we have a pad X, the X, from left to right, and then for Y is from top to bottom. So we have a 20 and a 10 padding. Then we have commands. We have the command print, add entry, update entry, delete entry, cancel, and then the only one that's kind of different is command on your exit. You can say root.quit. Make sure you get the code for all of these buttons, and button clear and button exit. And guess what? That is all the source code. Hey team, another video under the belt. Now this one right here was a great learner, starting with Python, TKinter, and JSON integration. 3 things that are great to have in the old feather in the cap. Now, where do you go from here? Well, practice some more. Maybe you can write this program all by yourself now if you're new to programming. And if you're not, practice this a few times and build up the skills. And there you have it. Please consider leaving a comment to ask questions, leave comments about the code, or you think of ways that can make you do better. Anybody that's junior to you, I'm sure will benefit by your knowledge. And lastly, thumbs up if you consider this video worth someone else watching. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing, only if you think you want to follow. And that's it. Have a great week, and I'll see you back in my next video.